I'm very pleased to be here. My name's Tina Burton, and I'm course leader of digital media production in the Cambridge School of Art, which is part of Anglia Ruskin University. And I'm delighted to welcome Scott Snibbe, who's joining us today from California. So welcome, Scott, and welcome to everybody. Just so you all know, that this is being recorded. So if you don't want your faces to show, you can turn your cameras off, as I can see some of you already done. And then what we're going to do is, the way that we're going to run this is that Scott's going to talk about his work, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. And I've got some prepared questions myself too. So we'll have a bit of a chat really afterwards. So please do use the chat mechanism, which is on the bottom of your screens, if you have got burning questions to ask, and I'll make sure that we ask Scott afterwards. So thank you, and over to Scott.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's always been one of my favorite things, giving talks and talking to people. A lot of it's because a lot of discourse is so brief and cut off, you know, in society today. So it's nice to just tell a longer story and have a longer conversation. So thanks a lot. I'm going to give a little presentation. I'll show a little, since I'm an artist, I want to show some art, and then we'll talk. So this will be about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll chat. So let me get this. Okay, here we go. All right. There we go. So I want to start out just by talking about reality a little bit. That a lot of us forget that we don't actually perceive reality, but what we see is a model that's constructed by our brains from these 5 time-varying sense streams that come into our brains or our minds. And our current consensual view of reality is one that of an infinite array that's possible to perceive. So we each see the world differently based on our preconditioning. And you know, especially lately too, with all of the you know, huge social justice movements, I think even more than ever, we're seeing how much we each see the world differently. One thing that I think we forget is that we don't just have 5 senses, we have a 6th. So going from the brain to that, I don't know if anyone recognizes that image. That's from 2001, if you remember the final sequence in 2001. And so that I use to represent our thoughts and our imagination, which are a 6th sense that we have, that the brain's not just an integrator, but it's also a generator of sense stimuli. And so we have access to alternate realities. We talk about AR, or augmented reality, and then there's also this idea of alternate realities or virtual realities. But we have access to alternate realities when we think, when we dream, and when we imagine, or when we perceive works of art. And so a lot of my career has been about creating interactive platforms that produce these alternate perceptual realities that I'd like to share today. And also worth noting is that I've been doing this now for some time, at least for this medium, you know, since the 80s and 90s. And a lot of the work that I'm going to show, I think now seems from a quainter time when we were more optimistic about technology. And so that's sort of, I found like a lot of these ideas are even more resonant now today, because they remind us that technology can do a lot of great good and connect people and express joy and so on. So this is, I'm just going to jump through a few different pieces. You can tell I was quite young there. That was me in my 20s. And this was the first work of art that I showed at art shows and art festivals and galleries. This was called the Motion Phone. And some of you, you know, I wish this could be more interactive. You know, I could chat with you right now, but I bet some of you may have learned about abstract animation. There was a movement of abstract animation in the early 20s where we took, as the abstraction was growing in Western art, it was also taken on by filmmakers. And there's a particular filmmaker I love named Oscar Fischinger, and also Len Lai and others like that, where when I first saw these films, I'll keep playing this actually, it's really nice. Oops, let's see here. I should put this one on loop. When I first saw these films, I was very moved because they were so emotional, that there was so much emotional content just coming out of moving shapes and forms. And so what I wanted to do was to make that more like an instrument where you could perform with shapes and color and movement. And so it's kind of like jazz. You have a 1-second loop and you can add and add and add like a painting, but with animation. So you add and add and add and add more animated material. The other thing about this is it was collaborative. So this was, early internet or early web. And I allowed people to connect to each other over this infinite shared abstract canvas and communicate. One of the things you notice is you can't troll anybody, you can't insult anybody with abstraction. So it's actually kind of a beautiful way of communicating, and also a very personal one. One thing I noticed early on with computers, I was really struggling to figure out how your personality gets into the computer. And I realized that the cursor, the way when you're using a mouse, the cursor was the way that the part of the computer that had the most personality. And so I connect the cursor to the movement of abstraction. Very soon, though, I really wanted to go a lot further with movement and gesture and use not just the movement of your finger. A lot of what computers do is reduce a human being to like one eye and one finger. Even today with your cell phone, that same thing happens. So I started doing these works. This was the first one called Boundary Functions, where your whole body is the interface. Like I've always wanted to make computers more like people rather than making people more like computers. And so these works of art, they're physical, they're social, they're embodied. This is a floor that you walk on. And when you walk on the floor, it's called Boundary Functions. It draws lines between people. And when there's no one person, nothing happens, which is very interesting. So it has to be social, this work of art. And as you get more people, in a lot of ways, it gets more interesting. So it draws all the lines between people. And those lines denote your personal space, right? So it's the space that's closer to you than to anybody else. But what I wanted to show, which is a recurring theme in my work, is that even though we call that area your personal space, it's only defined by others and it changes without your control. And so like a lot of reality is like that, where we think it's ours, we think it's personal, but actually it's entirely constructed, socially, mutually, interdependently. It's also a lot of fun, this piece. There's a field called proxemics that studies how close people stand to each other in different cultures. And because this piece showed in so many different countries, it was actually kind of an experiment in proxemics where it showed how people behave differently. Like when I went to Germany and Austria, where I first showed this, people would stand on opposite ends of the floor. And I was kind of disappointed because I thought the piece was a failure. But then when I went to Japan, people would come to each other and even touch each other, because they're used to being much more crowded together. And there's stories about all the other places I showed it to, but people behave differently in space, which I think a lot of us miss right now in the COVID era. I did a lot of pieces like this that were wall projected pieces that use your shadow. This was one of them, probably the most significant one, called Deep Walls, which you can probably see the reference to pop art, making a tiled array of little squares. But what I was trying to do was make a wall with a memory. So a wall that recorded everything that happened in front of it in shadow, but not like a photo booth. The way a photo booth is actually a machine controlling a person where it says 3, 2, 1, pose. But what I wanted was this to be more natural. So what happens is that it starts recording as soon as you move in front of the screen, and it stops recording as soon as you leave. And so your body as soon as the last person leaves. And so your body controls the recording and playback. So it very much, it also had this effect of really invigorating a space and enlivening a space. Somehow it really promoted people to perform for each other, kind of like breakdancing or something. The last thing that's really interesting about this is the use of shadow and silhouette, because clearly this piece uses surveillance technologies, right? It's using a camera pointed at people. But since I'm only recording a shadow, it has a really interesting property in that you can see yourself, you can recognize yourself and your friends immediately, but to other people, you're anonymous. So especially today, in this world of constant surveillance, it's, I think, useful to see that you can use those same technologies in a way that both promotes the kind of public discourse and performance while still preserving privacy. I wanted to show a little bit of commercial work. I created a company called Snibbe Interactive that took this technologies in my artwork and made some interactive, mostly science museum exhibits. And so this was one of the more significant ones we did with Avatar with James Cameron. And so this piece takes that scene from the Avatar movie and it lets those wood sprites, you remember the wood sprites that come when if you're kind of gentle, they'll come or special, they'll come and sit on you. And so that's how this piece works, is that it actually responds to gentleness. So that if you sit still and you're gentle, these wood sprites come and land on you. And if not, they fly away. We did a lot of other interesting pieces with them too. This is a piece where this one that sounds important. I've done a number of electromechanical sculptures. This is one called Blow Up that amplifies your breath into a huge field of wind. So you have this little console that you could record. It's kind of like a little break beat that you can record a breath, blow into this, and it amplifies your breath with these huge fans. And when you let go, it plays it back. But what I wanted to do was really play with this idea of, again, interdependence and kind of the public and private. So it's very rare that you'll say breath without saying my breath. But in so many ways, breath is the most interactive and interdependent aspects of yourself. If we were in a room together giving a lecture, which is kind of scary now, with COVID, we would have already breathed in and breathed out each other. We've already been breathed in parts of each other, breathed out parts of myself, and actually literally incorporated ourselves into each other. So I wanted to get at some of those ideas. And then when iPhones and iPads came out, I got excited because I did a lot of screen-based artwork, and I was a little frustrated at the audiences. It's a very small audiences, and often the same audiences showing digital art around the world. And so I was really excited when the iPhone and iPad came out. I thought, oh, I can take these works of art and then put them in an app store. So you could now sell them the way a writer sells a book or a musician sells a song, or give them away for free. And so I took these apps and I took these artworks and turned them into apps. This was the most popular one, called Gravelux, which is actually still available. I just updated it recently. And so what it was is a way of, there's a whole series trying to combine sort of drawing, animation, and the laws of nature into interactive pieces. And so this is one where you can kind of draw with stars. You touch the screen and it's a simulated galaxy, star field. And it turned out the piece also had a very therapeutic effect on people. It's very relaxing. A lot of people actually, I'd get reviews of people coming home from work and saying, I like to use this piece to relax and calm my mind. So it's sort of brings you into the present. Like a lot of my work, I have these kind of two goals of making you not regret the past, not be planning for the future, but just be present right now. And they've done scientific study. That's when you're happy, is just when you're present. So as you draw, this is another one that's more you lay down these points, and between the points, lines move, and a colored line advances and plays a note based on the length of that line. And let's stay in that scale, and we can use all our fingers at once. A lot of this inspired by things like Brian Eno and John Cage, kind of games that create music. And you recognize that diagram. That's the same diagram that's in boundary function. I'm very fascinated by this diagram. It has a lot of natural analogs, like cells form in these patterns. People settle in these patterns. Dogs pee in these patterns, believe it or not. So then those apps were more successful than I thought. And then they got the notice of Bjork. It's kind of one of the best emails I ever got in my life from her manager, saying she was trying to turn her next album into an app. So every single song would have an app component to it too. So before this album called Biofilia, all of her other albums were kind of avatar persona type albums where Bjork takes on a character, and then the songs are about her sort of emotional journey as that character. For this one, she wanted to take on something else. And so she took on the topic of the entire universe. So it's actually everything about nature and a great deal about music. So combining music, technology, and nature, and every song having something to say about, those three aspects. It actually turned into quite an educational program too for children, a different way of learning about music and nature. So this was Biofilia. This is just a quick reel to show some of the experiences. The interface to Biofilia is is another kind of galaxy. Each constellation is one of these interactive experiences. So every song had a music visualizer that let you see the music in a more natural, abstract presentation than Western music. And this is a sequencer that sort of relates to this idea of the moon, the woman's cycle, pearls, turning that into a musical sequencer. And this was about electricity, Tesla coils and arpeggios combining. In her concert, she used a real Tesla coil that would perform with her while she sang this song. And this one, Crystalline, was like a video game where you could go into different parts of the song by navigating these tunnels. So you could kind of write the song as you play. And this one, Dark Matter, this one is very esoteric, just like Dark Matter is, I guess, and is more about scales. This one is about DNA, and it was a kind of drum sequencer based on a DNA replicator. That's what the molecules look like when they're replicating DNA. This one, Virus, is a kind of instead of a femme fatale story, it's like a virus fatale story where the viruses love a cell so much they have to kill it. You can see the cells singing the lips around. More relevant than ever with COVID. This shows you how viruses work by injecting DNA into a cell and then attacking the nucleus. Quite accurate, yet poetic portrayal of a viral infection. And this was a kind of sequencer, one where you can just play with Björk's music and her voice at the same time. This one, Mutual Core, was about plate tectonics and breakups. Kind of like the Earth is breaking up.
This eruption and stagnation. You didn't know that I had it in me.
And this is her. Björk loves Christmas. Christmas is really big in Iceland, although it's a bit darker. Like their Santa is sort of like an evil Santa. But in this one, you can use a Christmas tree to create a sequence several melodies together. There you go. That's Biofilia. And then, there's lots. I've just abbreviated, a few kind of greatest hits from, my career. But I wanted to show a couple other things. After making all those apps, I got really interested in trying to open up creativity to everybody. Like, what if you could make an app where everyone could be creative in some way that's meaningful to them? And so we came up with this idea for something called igroove, which you'll laugh when you see it because I think you really understand the idea now, because basically it was TikTok. But this was in 2004, and we made this app, and the idea was to let people combine video editing, effects, and music all together at once, and really, really easy and gestural. And so I'll show you some of those. Again, it's quite obvious now, but it's funny, back in 2013, 2014, I was like trying to convince investors that people want to do this. And of course they do. So we call these grooves, and these are just some examples. But it's still a little bit different than what you see in TikTok and other platforms. It is very, very visually creative and expressive with all of its effects.
Out in your face.
Back in the building, so crack in the living room. Niggas toe tag, so gats for a living. Do rag, keep a red or blue flag.
It hurts. You know
Art students like Cubism.
I'd quench that thirst. I can you say you're lonely.
So what's interesting about this is, well, I don't know how interesting it is, but what happened to iGroove is that we got acquired by Facebook, and all this technology that you see is now in Instagram, Facebook, Messenger. If you make reels in Instagram and apply an effect, it's using our technology. So that was kind of a very interesting outcome. I was never a person really designed to work for anybody else, but I worked at Facebook for about 3 years, from a little bit before the Trump election, through a difficult time there. But we did, all this technology got integrated into a tool probably most of you use, Instagram. And then just to let you know what I'm doing now, a lot of your work as a digital artist is actually keeping your work going, because you have all of this technology that's difficult to maintain. So I'm actually in the process of getting a lot of those old apps to work and re-released over the 3 years, and I'm just 1 year into that. But another big project, I've talked a little bit about, I don't know if I've mentioned the word Buddhism, but a lot of the ideas in my work come from Buddhism. And so I've been a Tibetan Buddhist for about 22 years or so. And so I've actually been a meditation teacher for a long time. I was invited to start teaching meditation about 14 years ago. And recently, about 2 years ago, I started spending a lot of my time on a podcast and a meditational education program called A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment, which adapts, Tibetan Buddhist meditation into a form that's secular, that doesn't require any belief, for just ordinary people, ordinary, kind of intellectually curious people. So that's mainly what I'm working on now, in addition to these other things. So. Oh, and there you can find, that's where you find me. Thank you. I think now we can chit chat. Oh, I can't hear you, Tina.
That's better. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. That was enthralling, I think is the word that I'm looking for. Really, really cool to hear about some of your earlier projects, and how, for me, it was like some of the things that you did really quite a long time ago could have been made today. And also that quite a lot of things, maybe just we're viewing through pandemic eyes. But so much, making the breath installation today would have been a very different kind of context, really, wouldn't it? Than when it was made. I forgot to mention, by the way, if anybody wants to ask a question in person, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But if you do have questions, do go ahead and put them into our chat, which hopefully you've all got access to. But I think I'll just kind of carry on with some of the questions that I prepared. And I made some notes as we were kind of going through. Lots and lots of things to unpack. I was thinking when you were talking about you were talking about the early abstract animation work by Len Lyon, Oscar Fischinger, and people like that. And you were comparing it. You're saying it was a bit like the looping thing you were talking about. Like you're making a loop. Then with the app that you were developing, you're making these kind of visual loops. And I really did think. I thought that really sounds like making sound samples and looping sounds too. So do you think that there is a kind of correlation between sound, the way that we work with sound, and the way we work with visuals in that way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I was really inspired by that. Like Brian Eno did these tape loop experiments where you just have you actually tape it together and sort of move it, like it actually kind of drags on the floor in your studio and comes back around. And you would just keep recording on top. So yeah, that was very much inspired by that. If you ever watch Captain and Tennille in the 70s, he used to work that way too, like the captain. that level keep us together. He would play that way. He was kind of a one-man band, and he had all these synthesizers, and he would just keep playing into loops too. So it's well known. It went into pop music. The Beatles obviously also worked that way a little bit.
Yeah, the beginnings of working that way, really, weren't they?
Yeah. The studio, like Brian Eno says, the studio is the instrument. Like that was his huge innovation. Like definitely following on the Beatles out. The Beatles are really the first ones to see the studio as their instrument, I think. And Brian Wilson, but Brian Eno is just so articulate, and I think he actually wrote a little article about it that was very influential called "The Studio as an Instrument."
Cool. It did also occur to me that you're actually making toys, aren't you? Grown-ups and children.
Yeah. I remember because I worked in a computer graphics lab in school. That was the only place you could get access to these computers and color monitors. In the 80s, it was just a little bit before everyone could afford a computer. And I remember my advisor was very, very literal minded, and he once he came up and he's like, "What's the point of these programs?" He's like, "These are totally useless." So then I started just calling my work useless programs. I would just say, and I would, whenever people say like, "What are these?" I would just say, "Oh, they're useless programs." I'd say they're as useless as a song, a story, a novel, a movie.
Yeah. And
that kind of useless.
Yeah, I think that's what a great response to give him as well. There is a question coming, but I'm going to pause it for a minute because I wanted to follow on just talking about like making toys, but also I saw that I was wondering about how playing and playfulness is part of your process, because it was really clear to see, especially in some of the kind of interactive installation work, how people were very fluidly just playing with the technology, playing and trying things out. And I wondered whether that was part of your process as a creator.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's so much fun to be an artist. I think in general, like especially when you're making art, they're not all of being an artist is making art, but it's so delightful. It's so much fun to get in that process, whether you're editing video or making music or drawing, painting, to get into that flow state. A lot of it, I think, is because you forget yourself, whatever yourself is, which you could talk about for a long time. But you just become the process, right? Like if you've ever really gotten into that, you guys are all art students, so I'm sure every one of you has had that feeling maybe this week. If you ever really get into that, it's so delightful. And it's mostly because you're just not thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about me, my problems, my past, my future. You're just focused on what you're doing. And so you can call that a lot of things, but calling it play, I think, is a great way to call it, because it's childlike. It's not childish, but it's childlike. And it's children are so naturally in the present and so imaginative and so creative and so engaged. And that's the part I think we really want to carry that forward with us. You don't see a lot of adults with those qualities. You do see a lot of artists with those qualities. If any of you guys watching Get Back right now, this Beatles?
Yeah, I watched the first two.
Yeah. So this thing, I mean, there's never really been anything like it. And I don't think ever will be anything like it. I don't think anyone had the patience to watch, most any artists for like 16 hours doing their thing. But it's really, really worthwhile with the Beatles here, even if you don't like their music, because it shows that creative process. I think it just absolutely perfectly shows like the level of like openness and intuition and like joy and flexibility, even in like their worst moment too. This was like when they were really, quote, depressed, and they're having a lot more fun than most people ever have, I think, even during this like bad period of their career. But I think you see like the ambition, they set these crazy huge goals, the flexibility, they'll like cancel those goals and make something totally new. They're going to do 14 songs in 2 weeks, and it's just an absolute perfect picture of, but you just see how like the personalities for the 60s they're so open and relaxed and thoughtful and generous, like you you see there, I think that despite all the problems we have today, there are a lot more people that are like that now. I think a little more, that was an uptight time in culture back then in the 60s that, people were rebelling against. But I think seeing even at 28, the kind of creative and even like spiritual maturity that they have as human beings, and the creative process, and the play, how much play is and joyfulness and goofiness and joking around, how important that is. So yeah, we could talk for an hour just about that.
I know I absolutely could. I've been making absolutely everybody I know watch it. And
yeah,
the thing that struck me about it was that even they're really messing around, and with the music though, always around the music. And even when they're singing in funny voices or doing feedback into speakers and stuff, it's also those, for me, those moments are as important as when it all, like, they make it, when it all comes together, be possible. And that kind of ability to just let rip, to fail, to just have a go, and have fun it seemed really, found it really inspiring too.
Yeah, and openness to other people's suggestions, pulling things in that work, how to gently push things away that don't work. And then also the way like Paul connects to his unconscious, you see him just kind of like, almost like speaking in tongues, letting a song just appear. I think that's also really important to realize that creativity is something a lot bigger than you, that it's more like channeling the universe and around you rather than like forcing something out of your singularity.
Yeah, and I think there's a permission in there somewhere. There's a permission that we need to give to ourselves to do that, and that was, anyway, that's cool. That's really cool. Okay, we have actually an actual question from someone else. So I'll look at that one. So it says, hello, I want to ask a question. And it says, how is interaction different in video and illustration? I'm not entirely sure I understand that fully.
It's okay. I can try to answer.
Okay, go for it then. Yeah, so how is interaction different?
Yeah, I think I understand what they may be trying to say. Probably like the screen-based interaction versus like, video interaction. Well, the screen-based interaction, again, your body collapses to your fingertip and your eye. So it's more about like, it's more intimate. It's usually personal. Like the interaction is with you, your mind, and this system, rather than with others for the most part. But that's very powerful too. It's a little bit more like meditation focused creation. It's like giving an ordinary person the experience of what it's like to be an artist. The video interaction, or kind of physical interaction, that in general, that's designed to be more social and to pull out, to get better as more people interact with it at the same time, and to pull out like social interactions, and even to change social behavior, particularly in the direction of kind of joy and presence and performance.
Okay, we have another one as well. This is from the first one was so the person who asked the first question also said, by action psychology also be used in architecture. So I think that was referring to the first question that they asked. So I think you answered that, actually. Okay. And then there's a question from Marcus, who says, I'm really fascinated by your hybrid analog, tactile / digital designs. Typical question, but how do you normally find inspiration for your projects?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really, I think, a personal, not that I don't mind answering, but I think it varies person to person. For me, I'm very much the kind of top-down creator, that I start with, like conceptual artist, where I start with an idea, a particular idea interests me. Usually nothing to do with technology, an idea about reality or about human beings, or philosophy, even trying to express a philosophical idea in an interactive system. So I don't think that's that common. It's more common with conceptual artists and people like Yoko Ono, or like we were talking about, John Cage, and Robert Irwin is a great example, I think. And also so that's the particular way I work, is kind of idea first, and then trying to find a physical interactive expression of that idea. I think a lot, I was trained in animation, so I think a lot of putting yourself into two different roles, where one day or at some times you're more like the writer or the director, and then you become like the actor or the technician. And I think in some media, you know, though those are actually multiple people, but I think you also need it for yourself, or at least I need it for myself as an artist. And I learned this in animation, because when I was doing animation, you're so in the weeds of drawing like one frame out of thousands. So you have to take that stage where you're directing and storyboarding and writing, and then wrap that up, and then just act like you're working for yourself and execute that idea. And creativity does come just the way, you know, an actor is creative in interpreting lines, but they don't change any of the lines. So that's kind of how I felt I have to work, because it's such different ways of thinking, and such different stages of work, that, you know, the kind of creation, ideation, planning, design, and then absolutely seal that off, and then go into execution. Not, you know, absolute literal lockstep execution, but execution where, you know, you're adding to, you're interpreting the idea and the plan rather than changing it.
Right. Also, this kind of made me kind of go on to think about, I mean, it's clear that, you know, the work that you've been showing us today is highly technical, and you're one of those very interesting hybrid, highly creative, and I assume highly technical people.
Yeah, and I have a computer science degree. I have like 35 patents or something too.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So I'm just wondering about the balance of those things. Are you just like, you know, kind of the original Renaissance man insofar as you don't differentiate between the two worlds, or does one feed into the other? Do you get ideas? You were saying you start mainly with that kind of philosophical, conceptual starting points with your work, but I'm wondering whether the technology itself kind of at some moments inspires or gives you ideas too.
Yeah. You know, so many of the divisions between things are artificial, you know, like art and technology is a great example. So I think a nice example is Van Gogh, where I think there's few people you'd think of as more of a more intuitive artist than Van Gogh, like intuitive, expressive. But what Van Gogh is like a technological innovator. You know, what happened at that time was they put paint in tubes, and so many artists were absolutely against this. They're like, this is going to screw everything up. Now people aren't grinding their own pigments and mixing their own oils. Like, it's just, the paintings are going to be garbage. Everyone's going to get so lazy. But Van Gogh really liked this innovation because it let him go out and paint in nature, just plop his canvas in a field and paint directly from nature, and not worry too much about, just squeeze it out, you know, and use the paint. So I think it's a little bit arbitrary what's technology. You know, running water is technology. Because I hear like oh gosh, this is a really like scary topic of like vaccination. But, you know, I've heard some people say, you know, like I have a friend who's really scared of vaccination, and she's like, oh, I don't like it because it's new technology. And I'm like, yeah, but, you know, where do we draw the line? Like, what is more unnatural than diverting a river to run through your house? You know, that's like, plumbing was a huge innovation in the Roman times, like 2000 years ago. So if you really don't want to be unnatural, maybe you should rip out the plumbing of your house. You know, it's so totally weird to run a river in and out of your house. So, you know, everything's technology. I think that's what I want to say. Like, everything humans do is technology. So I think it just appears that way when you're working with newer technology. It's just novel. But there's not really much of I don't think there's really a difference between all these different domains. Like, of course, as a person, you can only put so much in your head, and you have some proclivities one way or another. But I also really believe in the general ability of just about anybody to learn what they need to learn. The UK is really good with that. Like, your education is so amazing. You see that actually, because you'll see like the same person, the same intellect, the same ability, and they come from the UK and they're just like generally so much better and so much better. That's why actually a lot of that music, like from the 60s and the 80s, like the new wave music from the 80s in Manchester, like it's so great because it's about really rich topics. You know, you have like OMD singing about, you know, the atomic bomb and power stations and things like that, where you'd have American bands just singing about, you know, wanting to get the girl. So yeah, I don't, I think this content, the art divisions between domains are you know, they help break down university departments and so on, but everything's part of a continuum in our culture.
For sure. So we've got another question actually, which is from Emily. Emily is one of my colleagues who teaches on the digital media production course as well. And she's asking, how can we bring more play to the university to colleagues who might be scared or anxious to play and not see the value in it?
It is really important to the kind of marketing, you know, if you want to use that term, that everyone always wants to know why they're going to do something, you know, like if you write a book, if you ever talk to a book editor, they're like, why is someone going to spend $25 to buy your book? Like, that's a really big ask when you can get books for free all over the place. So I think like being really clear about the value of play, like the benefits. Why would you do this play workshop? Well, it'll make you more relaxed. It'll make you better able to express yourself. It'll help you connect better with other human beings, help you enjoy life and be present. If you say that, like, who isn't going to want to go to that workshop? Right? Like those. So I think being really clear about the benefits of something, why should you listen to this talk right now? You know, and, you know, we could say, but I think being really clear about the benefits rather than like, you should come to a play workshop. No, why should I do that? So I think being generous and being clear, telling people what the benefits are. But, you know, then there's the pedagogy, like there are specific ways of teaching. You know, a lot of my art teachers, I went to Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design. A lot of my teachers were trained at Cal Arts, and they had a particular pedagogy around experimental film, which was very experiential. Like when we studied animation, for example, they brought in a live model, and we would try to animate from the live model. So the live model would like do something, and then we'd like quickly try to draw it and animate it. So things like that. Or we had multi-class exercises where at first you're supposed to make your own music instrument, you know, then you bring that in, and then and you kind of don't know the course of all these, you don't quite know how all these things are going to fit together. And then the next class, once you bring in the music instrument, they say, okay, each of you gets to be a conductor, and you write a score that's not in Western notation and conduct the class to your score, and we record it. And then the next class, I say, okay, we're going to use that score to make an animation against. So like this way of teaching, there's many exercises like that are very like participatory, social, creative, a little bit like exciting and mysterious. You know, you actually don't know what's going to happen during the next class. Anyway, I'm sure you are familiar with some of these ways of teaching, but I think making it fun, exciting, and being clear what the benefits are.
And I'm sure that was quite a long time ago, not to be rude, but you remember it.
Oh yeah. Oh, and it's one of the only things I remember about my college. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's actually kind of scary when I look back, and I think I went to college in the 80s. I look back, and it's almost like a little sequence of like 8 memories or something. It's funny how things collapse like that. But yeah, those are one of those art classes are definitely the most salient memories. And I studied computer science, like philosophy, all kinds of things. But yeah, those exercises that are like visceral, participatory, creative, you made something surprising, funny, those have an impact, or involve stories too, obviously.
So I'm starting to realize that we've got like 15 minutes left. So anybody, if anyone has more questions, put them in the chat. But so there's a lot, you know, there's a lot we could talk about. But I think that it would be, you know, since you're a Tibetan Buddhist and your current practice is around this kind of podcast, helping people to do kind of guided meditation. I was wondering if you've been thinking about creating something that was more technologically driven rather than it being a meditation practice, but perhaps bringing some other technologies into that experience so that it's maybe more visual or something like that, or VR.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, effectively, that's what I was always trying to do with my art is give people that experience. The only frustration is just that, you know, the work was very physical. So it was disappointing to me how it mostly just lived in documentation. And and then even when it did show, it was kind of like the same people would come for it. So I actually got really frustrated with the physical, and they're very expensive, and they actually use a lot of resources. They're actually a little bit wasteful environmentally too. So I was a little bit frustrated of that way of working, just because it didn't meet its primary goal for me of people using it. Like, the point of my work was not to read about it or watch a video about it, but to experience it. So that's when I got excited about the apps, because then it's not the same type of work. Unfortunately, it's not the like social embodied type of work, but it did get at this kind of opening a door to some of the like mysteries of the universe and how that relates to our minds. And those apps were still quite popular. And so I've been working hard to, like I said, to bring them back so that people can download and use them. It brings people a lot of joy and meaning, sort of more than I even expected. But yeah, that was the goal of my artwork, was to, even before I was a Buddhist, you know, I was somehow playing with those same ideas of just presence and joy and connection.
And rightly so, I think.
Yeah.
So I did have some questions around that kind of area as well, which were to do with kind of embodiment, and you know, how you use technology to explore feelings of embodiment. And you did, you know, you mentioned that we're kind of, you know, this square screen focused thing, but and then, you know, to how do you approach that? How do you approach using the technology to bring that out, you know, to bring that people's feeling, you know, kind of, I guess, some kind of non-secular ways of thinking about this through mindfulness, but, you know, having your feet on the floor, or, you know, I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the avatar installation that you made, where actually it was the reversal of what you normally you do all this, but actually it was when you were calm and gentle that the thing happened, and how you kind of navigate your way through that.
Yeah, embodiment. Well, there's I actually wrote a paper about it, even. What was it called? Like social immersive media, and I published it even in a scientific conference, because I thought it was sort of useful to formalize. And there were like 8 principles or something, but one of them is about relating to continuous gesture. You know, it's like kind of the defining feature of being alive is that you move. There's even people are still quite confused about what it even means to be alive. Like, what is, because when you get down to the boundaries, it's very confusing. Like, are bacteria alive, or is a like frozen shrimp egg alive? So a lot of times people associate movement with life. That's actually a common model. And I think making work that responds to continuous gesture, like not button presses are like, there aren't buttons in nature. You know, everything is about continuous interaction with your body and the environment. So I think making work that responds and reflects continuous gesture and interaction and movement, I think, is a really good starting place to work that's kind of highly engaging and interactive. And there are a lot of other principles, but I think that's one of the most important ones.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. So we've got 10 minutes left. I wanted to ask you about working at Adobe. You were one of the, very long time ago, back in the early days of After Effects, I believe you helped to develop that program. And I thought maybe we could just spend a couple of minutes talking about what it was like to work in. Were you in the R&D? Were you in R&D? Was it, or is it? Yeah.
Well, it was some buddies of mine, and they were all named Dave. It's actually really funny. They used to have this T-shirt for the company. It was originally called the Company of Science and Art. That say there's a 50% chance my name is Dave. A very common Jewish name, you know. But they were buddies in college, and they formed this company. And I was not one of the core founders, but I was like always kind of helping out. And then they made this program called After Effects, which is kind of like Photoshop for video. And it was very disruptive at the time, because the closest competitor was a very expensive program. You'd have to pay like $1,000 an hour to use in a special room. So it got bought by Aldus, which a lot of people might not know. Aldus was like Adobe's biggest competitor at the time. And then Aldus got bought by Adobe. This was in the early 90s. So that's when I could have gone along with those guys kind of in the earlier moments of the acquisition, but I really wanted to finish my master's degree and get all the education I wanted to have, the technical education I wanted to have in computer science before leaving. And so, but then I joined them once they were at Adobe. And so I worked for a couple of years full time at Adobe and did a lot of things. That was where I got my first patents and created the first motion tracker, a language. I created a language for kind of working with creating effects that work on movement rather than on pixels, and a number of other things. So that was a really fun job working with my buddies for a couple of years there. In the early, and what's amazing is that code kind of infected all of Adobe. Like I look in other Adobe programs and I see the same interface, the same code I designed 20 years ago, I guess, or more, 20 something years, 24 years ago, 25 years ago. And now it's in everything, in Premiere and Rush and so on. It's kind of amazing how the same code, when you if you ever do collaborative drawing, like you do it, or exquisite corpse drawing, but collaborative drawing, especially if you draw something and someone else does, you see how the first mark on the page really defines the drawing. And so it's funny, it's that way too with software, where like the early days actually very much define the character and the behavior of the software.
Yeah, I can remember reading some of the Lev Manovich stuff about, how kind of cut and paste and all that stuff just comes from very postmodern ideas, and that, the interface is not neutral. It's not.
Oh yeah, we could talk about that for a really long time. Yeah.
But definitely is included. I guess finally, what was it like to work with Bjorg?
Oh, that was a dream. I mean, Bjork's not just a musician, right? And I knew that before even meeting her. I really admired her just as one of the world's great artists of any medium and all medium. And also one of the world's great people. You can kind of see, even without knowing her, that she has a good heart. So I was really thrilled to get invited to work with her on this Biofilia project. But what I really wanted to do was to observe her, because collaboration is very difficult and it often creates a lot of conflict. It either creates conflict or mediocre work. It rarely creates actually really great works, although it does it from time to time. And bands aren't really collaboration. I'm talking about where people kind of come together and then, just for one project. So I really wanted to watch Bjork and understand how she collaborated, because her collaborations seem to be better than the sum of their parts. Like, why are her videos so great? Why did the one movie she acted in, she got an Academy Award, and so I watched really closely how she collaborated. And what I noticed is, like, one of these things, you saw in the Beatles, which is the long stretches of time and relaxing. Like her idea of collaborating was like, okay, come and let's hang out for like a week and we'll have nice meals, we'll go to the movies, and then like we'll do some work together. So that was kind of an eye opener, because at that point in my career, I was very much, more of an American, like just focusing on work kind of approach. So I think of the importance of the environment too. Like she would choose very, very interesting environments to work in. Like she rented this lighthouse in Iceland, where only at low tide can you walk out to it, and then it gets the water fills up, so you're stuck there. So she really liked to work out there, because then we'd be stuck there with water all around us and you couldn't get out for like 6 or 7 hours or something like that. So a lot of kind of clever things like that. But I think the biggest one was just looking at how she worked with people, because she worked with different people in different ways, but mostly she give people a lot of room. I mean, first of all, there's hiring, choosing the right person is obviously like probably the most important thing in collaboration. Finding someone that, has the right skills, but also that can like listen and be flexible. So I saw that she'd spend a lot of time giving a kind of groundwork of her vision at a high level and playing the songs. And then she left a lot of room for each of us to interpret that vision. And then she'd look at what we'd bring back. And like, depending on the person and the time, sometimes she'd just say like, okay, that's great, do some more. Other times she'd say like, I have to, let me think about that. And it took me a while to realize that let me think about that means hell no. So, but I think, the gentleness, like to let people discover that in a kind of face-saving way, is probably good, where you've discovered yourself like, okay, let me think about it means like I need to start from scratch. But and then at times, when people really did need like absolute, like it wasn't working out, then you get drilled down to the details and actually do storyboards and writing and say like, okay, let's make it look just like this. So I think dialing up and down that level of like management, if you want to talk about it, depending on the person, the stage, the project, leaving room for people to bring their work, and then being so gentle in your gentle yet clear, in your feedback. So she was pretty uniquely excellent at collaboration, I would say. And that's what I got most out of it.
I think that what supports what you're saying is that I can see you in that work really clearly. And I think that's really important. If you you haven't been squashed or intimidated or whatever it is, that
Yeah.
room your own creativity to come through.
Yeah, they say that about art teachers, right? Like a bad art teacher, everyone's work looks like the teacher's. And I'm sure everybody on this call has, seen this one way or another. And a good art teacher's, everyone's work looks like themselves. A great teacher helps you figure out better what you have to say and what you want to express and how you say it. And I've seen it. We were actually touring different schools for my daughter right now, just like middle schools, because she's really into art. And actually one school I got really turned off on because they had the art posted in the hallways and it's good, but it's identical. Every single person's work looks exactly the same. And I was like, no, that's not, I don't think that's right.
Okay, well, I think unless there's any last minute questions, I think that we've kind of drawing to the close. But I just wanted to finish by thanking you. It's just been absolutely fascinating to meet you. I knew about you from when I was doing my master's degree in interactive media 10 odd years ago. And it's just been absolutely brilliant to meet you and to talk in some, not too much depth, but some depth about your work and see where you're coming from. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Scott.
Likewise. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was really a blast.
And thanks to everyone for attending too.
Yeah, thanks everybody.